Imagine you are standing in a vast field in the heart of a country that is home to more than 1 billion people. The sun is beating down with an intense heat that feels almost like a solid weight on your shoulders. For a long time, people saw this heat as a burden or something to be endured under the shade of a tree. But then, a quiet shift began to happen in the minds of leaders and thinkers. They started to see that relentless sun not as a problem, but as a massive, invisible gold mine waiting to be tapped. 10 years ago, the idea of turning that heat into enough electricity to power entire cities seemed like a beautiful dream, perhaps a bit too bold for reality. Many experts looked at the math and said it was impossible. They pointed to the reliance on coal and the old, broken systems that could not handle change. Yet, today, that dream has become a concrete reality that is changing the lives of millions. We often hear about climate change in terms of fear and disaster, but there is a parallel story happening right now. It is a story of audacity, where countries that were once seen as lagging behind are now leading the world into a new era. This transformation is not happening because of a sudden change in human nature or a wave of pure kindness. It is happening because the very foundation of how we value energy has shifted. We are moving from a world where being green was a luxury to a world where being green is simply the smartest way to make money. This shift is quiet, steady, and deeply exciting because it offers a roadmap for how we can actually pay for the future we want. To understand this, we must first look at the surface concept of the energy transition. On the surface, when people think about solar power, they think about shiny blue panels on roofs or vast deserts filled with mirrors. We see the technology as the hero of the story. We focus on how the price of these panels has dropped so low that they are now the cheapest way to make a spark of electricity. On the surface, it looks like a simple swap. We stop burning one thing and start catching another. We assume that because the technology is ready, the world will just automatically change. We see big numbers like 100 gigawatts or 500 gigawatts and we think the challenge is just about building more machines. This surface view is very hopeful, but it misses the messy, human reality of how a country actually changes its bones. If it were just about the panels, the whole world would have finished this transition years ago. There is something much more complex happening beneath those shiny blue surfaces that involves the way we design our societies and our markets. This leads us to a hidden assumption that many of us hold about how the world moves forward. We often assume that big changes happen because of grand speeches and ideological battles. We think that countries choose clean energy because they want to save the planet in a selfless way. The hidden truth is much more practical. The real driver of this revolution is economics. The hidden assumption is that the climate fight is a cost, a heavy bill that someone has to pay. But in reality, for countries in motion, it is an investment in growth and jobs. We assume that developing nations are waiting for the rich world to show them the way, but the truth is that they are the ones innovating because they have the most to gain. They are not betting on solar because it feels good, they are betting on it because it ends blackouts and creates hundreds of thousands of jobs. There is also a hidden assumption about risk. We think that investors stay away from new markets because they don't like the technology. In reality, they stay away because the boring stuff, like whether the electricity company can pay its bills on time, feels uncertain. When we peel back the layers, we see that the real magic isn't in the sun itself, but in the contracts and policies that make the sun a safe bet for a bank. If we look at the structural pattern of how this success is built, we find three distinct levers that act as the skeleton of the movement. These are planning, innovation, and localization. The first lever, planning, is what turns a vague promise into a real house. A good plan is like a map that accounts for every mountain and river along the way. It forces a country to look at the evidence and make hard choices about trade-offs. The pattern shows that when a plan is detailed, it actually allows countries to move faster than they thought possible. They realize that by organizing their goals, they can reach them years ahead of schedule. The second lever is innovation, but not just the kind that happens in a lab. It is the innovation of business models. For example, in places where people are worried about the quality of small solar units, the structure of payment changes. Instead of paying all at once, the money is released only after the lights actually turn on and stay on. This structural shift removes the fear of being cheated and allows capital to flow into tiny villages that were once in the dark. The third lever is localization. This is the pattern of keeping the value within the community. Instead of just importing panels from far away, countries are building their own manufacturing zones. They are making sure that the money spent on energy stays in the pockets of local workers. This creates a circle of prosperity that makes the transition irreversible. When people see that clean energy puts food on their table and gives their children jobs, they will never want to go back to the old ways. This allows us to reframe our entire perspective on who is actually saving the world. We need to stop looking at the energy transition as a story about the West helping the rest. We must reframe it as a story where the Global South is the main character and the primary driver of change. 4 out of every 5 people on this planet live in a developing country. These are the places where the demand for energy is growing every single day. The choices they make will decide the fate of our atmosphere. When we reframe these nations as hotbeds of innovation rather than victims of circumstance, we see a much more hopeful future. We realize that the path from ambition to action is paved with seemingly boring tools like market design and grid fortification. We can reframe the climate fight not as a burden of guilt, but as a race toward prosperity. It is a race to see who can build the most stable, cheapest, and most local power system. In this new frame, every second electron being clean is not just a target, it is a sign of a healthy, modern, and independent economy. Applying this to our daily life means changing how we think about the systems that support us. We often take for granted that the lights come on when we flip a switch, but we rarely think about the business models that allow that to happen. We can apply the lesson of planning by looking at our own long-term goals and breaking them down into small, practical steps. Just like a country needs a how-to guide for net zero, we need clear plans for our own transitions, whether they are in our careers or our homes. We can also apply the idea of localization by looking at where our resources come from and how we can support growth in our own communities. We should also learn to appreciate the boring things. We live in a world that loves the new and the flashy, but real change is built on the back of steady policies and reliable systems. We can be advocates for the kind of market designs that make it easy for clean energy to succeed. We can support the innovation of how things are bought and sold, not just how they are made. By focusing on the economics of our choices, we can make our own lives more sustainable without feeling like we are constantly making a sacrifice. To deepen this reflection, we should consider the scale of what is happening. We are witnessing the largest and fastest change in human history. Millions of people who lived in the dark are suddenly gaining access to power that comes from the sky. This is not just about light bulbs, it is about education, healthcare, and the ability to run a business. When we see the success of a country like India or Kenya, we are seeing a blueprint for the rest of the world. It reminds us that no goal is too ambitious if the motivation is grounded in the well-being of the people. This revolution is a gift that keeps on giving because it proves that we don't have to choose between the planet and the economy. We can have both. The momentum is now irreversible because it is built on the solid ground of good business. It is a reminder that hope is not just a feeling, it is something we build with our hands and our plans. We are all part of this global grid, and the choices we make to support these boring but essential tools will determine the world our children inherit. We must keep this momentum up because the time is right and the technology is ready. The only thing left is the will to design the markets that let the sun shine on everyone. As we look toward a future where every household and every bus is powered by the clean energy of the sun and the wind, how would our own sense of possibility change if we stopped seeing the climate transition as a painful sacrifice and started seeing it as the greatest economic opportunity our world has ever known?